Hello, everyone. Today, I'm really honored to be able to talk to the biographer and film historian Patrick McGilligan. He's written books about many great directors, including Fritz Lang and Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Nicholas Ray, many others. Patrick, one of the first times I was ever aware of you was when I found the biography of Robert Altman in my library when I was in high school. I was very into Altman at the time. Your book on him came out at a strange time in his career because people weren't sure if we would ever hear from him again. And then he ended up having this great resurgence in the 90s. I was curious, first of all, if there's ever been any thought about doing a follow-up or a new
Well,
edition or anything like that.
tell me this. Where did you go to high school? That was a good high school to have that book in the library.
Well, it wasn't at my high school. It was just during my high school years. It was the city library that had your book.
Oh yeah, what city was that?
West Covina, California.
Yeah. Um, well, I met Altman in the 70s, and then I was on the set of Popeye, which is obviously not his greatest film.
Hmm.
And he had a very peculiar decade in the 1980s, and he sure looked like he was done.
Hmm.
Or like that he was fading to the margins, of the film business. I'd say willingly or willfully. And so that's what happens when you write about a book about a living person. You're stuck with their life, and they're stuck with their life.
Hmm.
And so I wrote it, that he had had a very off decade, of scrounging, but also doing really interesting, work at the same time,
Yeah.
and kind of, regirding his loins for another try, but that wasn't clear. And so I had to write a postscript to that book, or the last chapter,
Hmm.
in which I, had him get up in the mirror and shave and do his hair and look in the mirror and wonder what's in store for him for the future. So honestly, I was lucky that he had the world is very lucky that he had such a great third act.
Yeah.
And yes, it has occurred to me, and you didn't mention that book when you were mentioning directors. Actually, I never say it, and I never say these kinds of things publicly, but he was my favorite director. And
Hmm.
I'd be tempted. There's probably not enough money in the world, and probably not enough information left to share, because I spent all the book on his early life and his formative influences, and then his glory years of the late 60s and 70s, and really set the groundwork for his personality and his psychology, et cetera. And after a certain point, when you've done that much in a book, then it becomes a question for the writer of how to write about and then the next film over and over again without just becoming boring.
Yeah.
So you could write about, the greatness of shortcuts or the greatness of the player and how they got made and where the source came from. But you'd have to, because you've already laid the groundwork for how he works and how things get done, and even I laid the groundwork for his comeback, you'd be barreling through those films to a certain extent.
Mm. Yeah. Do you know if Altman saw your book and had any reaction to it?
He did. He told Rolling Stone that I must have been drunk or stoned when I wrote it. Literally me. And I was honored to be attacked in Rolling Stone by Bob.
Mm.
Look, I I love him. I love his work. Was he a difficult person? Yes.
Mhm.
And that's why he said that, because most of the people that I talked to, talked about the trouble working with him. I just sent off an interview to Positif in Paris, an old interview with Barbara Turner from my Backstory 5, who was one of his early writers in the 60s. She had been married to Vic Morrow. She's done it for Jason Lee's mother. And then she wrote his penultimate film, the Company, the ballet film.
Mm.
And she talks throughout the whole thing of, her love for him, and also what a what a difficult character he was to work with
Mhm.
as a writer. And that's a
Mhm.
lot of what the book is about. It comes out in his work. I like that kind of guy who's both supremely dedicated to like making movies and doing his best. And if you told him Quintet was his worst, he'd be really, really upset because they're all great from his point of view.
Mm,
But he's really, really dedicated, and yet he can be a lot of fun. He was enormous fun, on the set and partying and everything else. And
mm,
at the same time, he could be an enormous, prickly bear.
mm,
Similar kind of character as Jack Nicholson, who I also wrote a biography of. Also, he's a bit of a director, supreme professional, amazing. Example of like a real working actor who, when he had a part, really, really worked at it and worked at making the set a good place for everyone to be when he had scenes, including people that were off camera or that he'd be off camera for. And then, off the set and in person, he was could be a wild man.
mm.
And there were and then the wild man, gets into the movies just
Yeah.
like the wild man Altman, who loves parties, gets into his movies. Yeah, I've thought about it. I don't think enough money in the world could tempt me, but
Mm.
money can tempt you.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Altman film?
You know what? I probably have like five favorite Altman films. I just finished this book about Woody Allen, and I did a poll of about 110 film critics, asking them a series of questions, including, what was their favorite Woody Allen film, or what did they consider to be their best? And, Woody's made like 50 plus movies. Well,
Mm,
35 movies got a vote from somebody as one of his 5 or 10 best.
mm,
I tried to leave it at five, but people say, well, I just want to name 6 or 7. So eventually I, published the entire list. I feel the same way about Altman. I love McCabe and Mrs. Miller, The Long Goodbye, the greatest movie for me, the great American movie of my lifetime. And I like it, as much as Annie Hall or Raging Bull or Do the Right Thing, or Blazing Saddles,
mm.
and that's Nashville. I
Yeah.
mean, Nashville, there's nothing like it. There never will be.
Right.
Um, it's completely original. It's very deep. It's very wild. It's varied. There's a lot of like, music, drugs, rock and roll spirit to it.
Mm,
And it's a masterpiece. I love it. Now, other people hate it, you
mm.
know, but most people hate Altman to begin with,
Yeah.
that he's difficult. He's difficult. His soundtracks are difficult. Uh, his iconoclasm, I mean, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, I mean, it's such a great anti-Western,
Mm,
in which you have to peer at the screen. I saw it when I was working for the Boston Globe. When it first came out, we went to a big theater and the Combat Zone or somewhere, and you couldn't tell what was going on the screen. It was so dark, and the snow was falling, and the music isn't going. But it's brilliant. And the more you see the movie, the more it reveals itself to you as something very, very different than anything else. And I like Altman for that reason. And
yeah.
we got along well many times together. And I don't blame him, because if someone wrote my biography, I would be annoyed and think it was completely, off the beam also. Because really, when you're writing a biography, it's like you have a big, statue of clay, and you keep working on that statue to make it look as much like the person as possible, and
Mm,
poking this and adding this and poking this and adding that. And let's say you're trying for realism or factual information and as natural a portrait as possible. You work right up to the point of publication, and then you publish. And it's always a sketch of a life, I mean, it can't I don't even feel very proprietary about my subjects. People will say to me, "Oh, so and so just published a new biography of Clint Eastwood. How do you feel about it? And I'd go, well, he's pretty good. He'll probably write a pretty good book. I mean, I don't own Altman and I don't own Eastwood. My personal private opinion is that my books are the best,
Mhm.
but other people disagree. And
Right.
I'm not crazy about it, like thinking, oh God, don't you dare touch, Robert Altman. But on the other hand, he's special to me. He's my idea of a great filmmaker in my lifetime. He has a sensibility, an iconoclastic sensibility, a political sensibility, even an artistic sensibility, even when he does crazy things like, Quintet or, even which is not a terrible movie, but worse movies, even when he does them, his sort of questing and his like, let's give it a try. What the heck? It's just a movie.
Mhm.
Wow. I love that. It's very, very, has a big impact on me for his view of how to make movies. So I find him a greater American movie maker. I don't want to say, because I don't want to name some other person who I really admire, but I like him best.
Mhm.
Even though he's supremely flawed, both as a filmmaker and an individual, and his films are flawed. I like a messy film. I
Yeah.
like a messy film. I
Yeah.
like a perfect film too. I have a lot of tastes, different tastes, but I
Mhm.
like a messy film, and he was a messy filmmaker.
Yeah. Can you give us a title of one of Altman's lesser known movies that you wish everyone knew better and would give a second chance to or first chance?
Well, I mean, in the 1980s, for example, there's Secret Honor. There's a one person movie, about Nixon. Trying to remember the actor's name. I think he's still around, but he
Philip
wasn't
Baker Hall.
Philip Baker Hall. Yeah, is he still around?
I think he passed. I'm not totally
Um,
sure.
it could be just recently, but anyway, he wasn't well known at the time. The movie's amazing. The movie's
Yeah.
amazing. It's quite brilliant. There are movies during that period like OC and Stigs, which I think is like completely unfunny. It's a comedy. It's a comedy, and Altman could be funny, although he fundamentally was comedic but not funny. Um, but Secret Honor is fantastic. Streamers is fantastic. Come back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean. Jimmy Dean is spectacular.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Hmm.
It's an extremely weird movie, but it's spectacular. So these are movies that most people didn't see.
Yeah.
And they were interspersed with, movies like the ones I mentioned, or the movie about the fashion industry in Paris, Pret-a-Porter, that we're not good, or sometimes we seemed abysmal, and people always said to him, why don't you make fewer movies and just make really good ones?
Hmm.
They said that to Woody Allen too. Well, Altman said, they're all good. They're all really good. And
Hmm.
I think he sincerely thought, they're all really good. I love that about him. Whereas Woody Allen said, well, if I made fewer and slower, they actually wouldn't be better.
Hmm.
And
Right.
both answers, by the way, very, very interesting reflections on their personalities. So,
Yeah.
so, but you know, Woody's a odd guy that you wouldn't necessarily want to spend an hour with him, or vice versa. He won't want to spend an hour with you, or 5 minutes.
Hmm.
Uh, but Altman was, you could listen to him. You can observe him. You can follow him around. He was intellectual. He was cerebral. He was mischievous. You know,
Yeah.
and he was warm at the same time that he was cold when he wanted to be.
Hmm.
But so I like him. I like him. I confess.
Yeah. Do you know how he developed his visual style?
I talk about how he got out of Jesuit, prep school, and went into the war so that he could so he could make MASH many years later. And he wanted to get into Hollywood, and he couldn't get into Hollywood. He tried. I talk about it in the movie, in the book, and he had various feet in the door that You see him on the screen in a Danny Kaye movie. He has a screen credit as a writer in another movie. So he gave it a good try, and he was good.
Mhm.
But they weren't taking people like him, so he went back to Kansas City, and he worked for about 10 years doing what used to be called industrials or business films, and he did films for safe driving and how to play basketball
Right.
and Meet Harry Truman, and they would be paid for by civic organizations or chambers of commerce or companies, and he had to follow so very carefully for the people everything he was doing. He had to follow this shot, then they have to say that, then you have to show this, then you have to say that. And he learned this like sort of strict 1, 2, 3 narrative continuity of it's not exactly documentary, but it's service filmmaking,
Mhm.
and it drove him crazy.
Mhm.
He was meanwhile, smoking pot and partying up, and drinking, and he was always like the life of the party. And he wanted to his anti-Hollywood stance, which I love. Um, Robert Redford, who died recently, is another person with extremely authentic anti-Hollywood stance, which I love. Even though in some ways they're the embodiment of a success in American film, in other ways they really, disparaged and did their best to stay away from things that were traditionally Hollywood.
Mhm.
Bob hated, conventional Hollywood movie making. And by the time he got to Hollywood again, 10 years later, it's 54 or 55, and he starts working for Alfred Hitchcock on his television series. He gets, he upsets everybody once again by refusing to follow the script and wanting to do his own thing on the set with sound and camera movement and everything. And he gets fired from Alfred Hitchcock. And then he gets fired from TV series after TV series for 10 years, sometimes after helping to pioneer and form the series, like and very good series like Bonanza and Combat. And all along, what he's fighting is their conventional genre storytelling, both script wise and visually.
Mhm.
And you see it in episodes of Combat, and you see it really, more I'd say starkly in episodes of Bonanza, where he's trying to break free and he keeps getting fired.
Mhm.
And then at the same time he's making independent movies, trying to do things, and he makes a whole movie, a small independent movie called The Party, and it's just people partying, and it's really good. Uh,
Mhm.
so by the time that MASH comes along, he has this reputation as this total rebellious, guy who won't follow orders, but has a great imagination for doing things in front of the camera. And the movie was not important, and they were saving money, and they could hire him. And then Zoom, that style, which had been germinating for 20 years and feverishly germinating,
Mhm.
bursting out in ways on the screen and both TV and independent projects in small ways. This burst forth in MASH and was full blown, and by then I think he's 41, at the time. He was one of the young Turks who was no longer young.
Yeah.
But he had this full blown, yeah, it was a visual style, but it was also, and you see it really dramatically, or let's say starkly again, in like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, in which he tells the story of a heroic Westerner, who's doomed and, is not so heroic and is in love with a prostitute who does, opium, or he does it in The Long Goodbye, in which he takes that great, cliche Hollywood detective invented by Raymond Chandler. And
Mhm.
he like, whacks it against the wall and around the room and, till it's unrecognizable as itself,
Yeah.
with the most improbable substitute for Humphrey Bogart in the history of the cinema, Elliot Gould, you know. So, and everybody's smoking dope and everybody's nude and there's great music on in the background. And um, that was full blown, by the time we first heard his name.
Yeah.
The industry had heard his name and fired him, and he had been in the trade papers as an obnoxious, difficult, guy who wouldn't follow orders over and over again
Yeah.
before that.
Hmm. So the signature things for him are like the constantly roving cameras, those long zooms in and out, the overlapping dialogue, of course. So you're saying these are things
Music,
that
music, music was
yeah,
music was astounding with him.
yeah,
For MASH, he gives the theme song to his 15-year-old son, and says, "What
yeah,
can you write?" For McCabe and Mrs. Miller, it's Leonard Cohen. For Nashville, everybody writes their own songs and sings them,
hmm,
including people who had never sung before.
yeah,
And it's a great score.
hmm,
Um, so it's a lot of things, that he doesn't get credit for. It's the roving camera, yeah. It's the multiple soundtrack, which is really modern,
yeah,
It's the anti-heroism in the story, the iconoclasm of the story, the rejection of cliche, um, and genre imperatives in the story. Somebody he'll do a genre film, like Thieves Like Us, deliberately to to destroy all your hopes for what kind of a great genre piece it's going to be, because
yeah,
he'll invert it completely. So
yeah,
many things, and he's always tinkering with them and perfecting them. Like Shortcuts becomes this long, complicated interwoven tapestry of stories, which is really very original, even though it's based on Raymond Carver, and almost raises to the level of a masterpiece, but has such great things in it because it's so ambitious as a narrative, even
yeah,
before you get to the visual storytelling.
yeah,
Acting and casting, very, very important. Is
hmm,
acting and casting were completely original. I was just watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest a day or two ago because I'm going to be on a podcast for its 50th anniversary, and watching that actress and thinking about her and Thieves Like Us,
hmm,
and
yeah,
and his his ability to take Jim Bouton, the ball player, and put
yeah,
him in The Long Goodbye, or Sterling Hayden in The Long Goodbye. His casting genius really never left him, so
hmm,
that the player is brilliantly cast and performed throughout by and tons of like tiny little bits of by famous people, walking through, like in Nashville, really, really often an inside joke, very, very funny if you know the joke. If you don't know the joke, it's okay. It's just
hmm,
part of the movie. All the way up through Gosford Park, which is, my wife keeps making me see the Downton Abbey films, and they're very good, and they're beautifully cast, and the scripts are beautifully written by the same guy who wrote Gosford Park,
hmm,
which was his template. And that's a brilliant film, even though it's a conventional, upstairs, downstairs British drama in which Altman is really playing with your expectations for the genre and constantly challenging them and inverting them. And Julian Fellows learned a lot. He learned a lot, through that process. I'm
hmm,
not saying he wasn't really, really smart to begin with, because that's a great script. But so Altman never stopped. They're doing some kind of Altman retrospective in France, and they told me they're doing this film and that film, and they asked me what I thought about his last film, Prairie Home Companion, with a script by Garrison Keillor.
hmm,
It's pretty good.
hmm,
It's really enjoyable, and there's always extra commentary on the soundtrack, even either through songs or radio or TV. He was very, very media, his whole series Tanner about Michael Murphy running for, is it Senator or President, Tanner 88 is, and partly written by Doonesbury, Gary
hmm,
Trudeau. It's absolutely uh, riveting, enjoyable, political series,
yeah,
uh, way ahead of its time.
right,
So, you could say, should Bob have worked harder to get a better take on this scene or that scene. It's what he was, a ragged, messy filmmaker. That was like his principle was, I'm building a sandcastle in the sand. The waves come in, they wash it down. I build another sandcastle. I think
Mhm.
he, I think he believed that. He didn't have false ego. He had a lot of ego, but he didn't have false modesty. He was modest too.
Yeah,
He didn't think he knew he was an artist, but he wasn't worried about what you thought, you know?
right. Did he ever regret taking on any of the directing jobs he did? Like, was he ever not happy with the results?
Well, the answer is, he would probably wince to answer it. I mean,
Mhm.
he can't have been happy with Popeye,
Right.
you know. And but was it his fault or was it more his fault than someone else's? He got into an idea groove when he was working, in something like Quintet or Popeye. They come around the same time.
Hmm.
To me, it's a kind of nadir of his ideas because you can't, you know, when I write a new book, I have to start all over again, remembering, thinking, learning. How did I do that? How can I do that? What's the best way to do that? He wasn't. He. That's what I have a feeling that that's what he did. He didn't do things by rote. So when he got into an idea groove that like was maybe too deep or he couldn't get out of for like either Popeye or Quintet, he went with the groove. He liked it for what it was. Would he say that, his producers, he frequently fought with his producers and with his screenwriters, So would he say he wished, he hadn't taken the job? Nah, he liked to work. I don't know. He was philosophical. The work will eventually there'll be like, a great body of work.
Hmm.
And then some people, like in the Woody Allen poll, if I were to poll people to their favorite Altman movies, I probably wouldn't get as many, of the total number because so many people would not. A lot of the films probably people haven't seen, but like Dr. T with Richard Gere or the one with Kenneth Branagh set in Savannah. Those movies tended to slip by the wayside, even though they're pretty good. I think the 10 or 15 that everyone can agree on are pretty towering,
Yeah.
you know. And the 10 or 15 that people think are the worst, Bob would probably say, they're all my children, and I love all my children equally, and
Yeah.
I love those films,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to segue to another director you profiled, Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Altman's kind of an acquired taste, but there are hundreds of books on Hitchcock. How did you decide that you would have something new to say about him?
Well, the honest answer is that I prefer to go to work with a contract that offers me money at the end of the job, and that the money makes a difference
Hmm.
to my thoughts,
Hmm.
my feelings about whether or not the job is attractive.
Hmm.
My editor had talked to me about Hitchcock for years. Pat, why don't you do Hitchcock? I thought with the Truffaut book and then with the book by Donald Spoto, that there wasn't room for a third.
Hmm.
And he kept upping the ante. I'll pay you more. You can take longer. Also, I knew it would be a tough book because he's not a man of action, so he doesn't do anything except this film and that film and this film and that film. And you can't
Hmm.
really skip a film because somebody somewhere will be really angry at you
Hmm.
for skipping their favorite Hitchcock film. But there was a point at which he said, Pat, please will you reconsider Hitchcock? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back and I'll read the Spoto book, which I hadn't read for, 15, 20 years. And I'll see if it, because I had progressed in my career and I had an idea now of what I was able to do. And
Hmm.
I'll see what my reaction to the book is. So I started reading the book, and gee, I read like, half of the first chapter, and I almost threw it across the room and called my editor and I said, yeah, I can do a book, much better book, you know.
Hmm.
And I think really it's a lot of what he wrote is BS. and
Mm.
it's not reportage. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to find out, but I know I'm going to find out, a different book.
Yeah.
And and I didn't know. And my editor was a great editor. He trusted me, and it took a long time, a lot of research, and uh, it turned out there was a completely different Hitchcock,
Mm.
waiting out there to be, again, the kind of person I like, supremely professional, extremely diligent, but as an individual, as a personality, his ideas and feelings and ticks and traits spilling over in various interesting ways, both to the filmmaking process and to the film. And then I think, to some extent, uh, you know, an interesting life story, aside from the fact that it was mostly a quiet life story.
Mm.
Like I say, he wasn't a big game hunter or something.
Right.
So I was eventually talked into it, by the
Mm.
contract and the offer, and then it felt, as they often do, or they all do to some extent, like a millstone, a lot of
Mm.
work, a big burden of responsibility because whatever I say would be, you know, thrown back at me
Mm.
forever.
Yeah.
Um, so I had to be very accurate. I had to be very complete. But I sometimes say that it's best to be either the first or last book, in people's minds of about a subject. If you're first, as I was in the case of Altman, you know, whatever you say is new.
Right.
Um, or I did the first book about Oscar Michaud that was not a critical essay book, and it was a biography. And people say, wasn't that really hard? And I said, no, I mean, actually, a lot of people who came before me did great work that I was able to build on and I attributed. But
Mm.
also, he made 45, 46 movies. I can't remember exactly. And most of them were lost,
Yeah.
so I was forgiven the task that I had in Hitchcock's case of telling you synopsis, script, all that process, and then criticizing or analyzing the movie because the movies don't exist.
Yeah.
Um, and it was, the first big book about him. I don't think there's been a second. But in Hitchcock's case, I had to read every other book and think about it very carefully. And that's both a blessing. You have all this material in front of you, and a total curse because there's just so much to wade through.
Yeah. Did you think that Donald Spoto had an agenda to just portray the sinister side of Hitchcock or the controversial things at the expense of the
Well,
whole?
I don't know if, yeah, I do, but I don't know if it was in his proposal or whether it was something that he hit upon, when
Mm.
he started working on the book. I only know him slightly or glancingly.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, in my book, I go back to keep things that he said and prove them factually incorrect.
Mm.
Um, and people would say to me, well, he came to me and he wanted to interview me, but all he wanted to talk about was what a sadistic monster, Hitchcock was. So
Mm.
I didn't do it. So I hear that was his approach. I have to say, and I always do say this, it's a very shrewd book.
Hmm.
It's believable. It's
Hmm.
a believable um, book. He wrote it, so it was credible. He was a
Yeah.
credible writer. And sometimes people say to me, I'm a professor and I'm teaching Hitchcock, and I use both your book and Spoto's. And I say, how can you use both of those books? They're diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
I in effect call Spoto a liar. And then I have a completely different vision and portrait of the kind of person Hitchcock was. So I don't know how you can do that. Oh, I still find some merit in Spoto. Well, I'm telling you, that's a very credible book. Just as, Truffaut's book is really great. His book of interviews with Hitchcock is obviously, a milestone achievement that we're all grateful for. And it also is full of problems and holes, including what Truffaut saw and what he didn't see, what films he was able to see, which ones he didn't see,
Right.
how it was edited, the translation, um, things that he said that Hitchcock like wasn't really sure even what he meant, and yet get handed down as lore. And but it's a really good it's a good honest book. I think Spoda's book is honest? Yeah, I think Spoda believed all that. I think he believed all that. He had a very lurid, or let's say purple imagination about a lot of things that he wrote about. But
Sure.
he wrote well and he was credible.
Yeah. Uh,
That doesn't mean he was accurate or
right.
truthful. He was
Right.
credible.
Now, speaking of Hitchcock, real quick, whenever he's portrayed on film by another actor, it always seems kind of laughable. I'm just wondering if you ever think he's been portrayed well in a fictional movie or biographical movie.
No, I hate both of those movies that came out, one of which borrowed and stole from my biography wholesale.
Mm,
And and then messed it all up so that it was not factual or truthful, just stuff they could put into the story.
mm,
Um, no, I mean you have to say they cast well, because Anthony Hopkins should be able to play anything.
yeah.
But but no, I met Hitchcock. I was on the set of Family Plot, and I was on the set for about a week because I knew the unit publicist, so I could just go and watch and then interview him and then hang around. He was hardly friendly or warm and fuzzy. He was actually very bored and grumpy and not in great health.
Mhm.
But um, my response to those bad films would be, why don't somebody try to make, a film about um, Hitchcock the way he really was? It would be so much better. It'd be so much more entertaining. He was a devilishly entertaining, bright guy. Um, People loved to be around him. Beautiful actresses loved to be in his movies because he treated them so well on camera.
Mhm.
And it's often their greatest movies.
Mhm.
Uh, and then he had great dinner parties where they played pranks. And he had a very wicked, naughty sense of humor.
Yeah.
His wife was a great character. I co-wrote a French television documentary about Alma, Mrs. Hitchcock. She was a tremendous character in her own right. They have a great daughter, who, when you talk about, Hollywood families, there aren't too many families where they all stayed together and were coherent human beings and had occupations. And
Mm,
so he was a great father besides. And then as a filmmaker, he's obviously great. So the problem, I think, when people get to something like that idea, they say, well, where's the drama? We have to create some drama,
mm,
in order. But I think there's quiet drama and truthful, biography. If you want a drama about somebody who leads an action-packed life and is involved with prostitutes and Nazis and communists and possibly killed his wife and also wears cowboy outfits and square dances, then Fritz Lang is your man, you know. Um, but I think, and that would be a great story, and that would be
yeah.
a great film, and you could dramatize it all you want, and you'd probably be fine.
Yeah.
But in Hitchcock's case, you're forced to act with a more subtle artist. I don't mean on the screen, because sometimes on the screen in Psycho he's not subtle, but the effects are very ingenious, and he was a subtle artist in his work always.
Yeah.
And it's more difficult. It's more difficult, so people have to soup it up. So those two movies, one is with Anthony Hopkins. I forget who's the other one. One is Tippy's point of view, and the other one is Alma's point of view. Is
Right.
the way
Yeah.
I look at it. Both of them very distorted from my point of view, but and kind of souped up and stupid.
Mhm.
They would have been much bigger hits and more interesting if they were more closer to the bone.
Yeah. Also, the actors have to be covered in so much makeup. It's hard to take seriously sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. Sometimes people can go far afield from who the person really is and be more true. There's a movie by Richard Linklater called Orson and Me. I think it's what it's called, um, about what's going on behind the scenes at the Federal Theater Project with John Houseman and Orson Welles. And it's a completely flamboyant, crazy portrait of Wells by I think, a Scottish actor whose name I can't remember. I'm sorry to say, which is brilliant,
Mm,
uh, hilarious, somewhat sarcastic portrait or satiric portrait of Orson. Um, so overboard that it's accurate, that it's good. So in other words, I think you could probably make a Hitchcock film in which Hitchcock is exaggerated, welcome, and really play it up and have fun, with it. But that movie wasn't much fun either. It wasn't, neither movie was fun either. So, I mean, that's what people miss about Hitchcock, I think, in Hitchcockian films. They miss the fun and they miss the romance, you know. Because when you say Hitchcockian, you mean suspense and terror and thrills, but you also mean the fun. It's usually fun or funny, and it's usually romantic. And so I think you could do that. You could have like a smart filmmaker could do that, and you could exaggerate Hitchcock. So when I say be true to the man, you could be true to Orson Welles the way Richard Linklater was by going way overboard and exaggerating him for fun, and still making your point. Because the movie is very respectful of his genius. But if you go in the other direction, you just soup it up. I just found it schlocky. If it had been better, it's Helen Mirren, right? Who plays Alma? Is that it?
yeah.
Yeah. She would have won an Oscar if it was a serious movie because she was good and, you know, it wasn't a serious movie.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure we cover Woody Allen before I let you go. I haven't read your book yet, but one of my first questions for you was originally going to be if you think he's done. But just this week, there's been news that he's going to start a new film. Do you know anything about that?
A little bit. And if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, I think he's done.
Yeah.
But, the truth is that guy is never done until he's really, really done. Um, Yeah, he's going to make a movie in Spain, in Madrid. They've cobbled together finance. The Spanish have been a great supporter of his films for several years in several films, or for a decade in several great films, including Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Mhm.
And he has a producer in Barcelona, and he hasn't made a movie in Madrid. So he said, "Well, I'm going to shoot a movie in Madrid." I guess they have a 2-year frame. He's been giving a lot of interviews because his novel was finished. It just is getting rave reviews in Paris now.
Mhm.
So, uh, look, I would say I thought his last movie was great. Uh,
Mhm.
Good shots. I mean,
Mhm.
it was, it wasn't Annie Hall, but it was really, really good.
Mhm.
Really fun, and really deft, really, really smart, in every way. Great French actors in it, and really fun to watch. Beautiful to watch. So he obviously still has it, but I
Yeah.
think the question of is he done, could be asked, is he done in America? And the answer is, they've pretty much canceled him, so he's pretty much done. He
Mhm.
can't get his films released really. And they don't get reviewed to the same extent. And bet that even I bet that even runs to whether or not bookstores carry his novel, you
Mhm.
know. Um, and To Woody's credit, he doesn't seem to think, seem to be bothered by that, but maybe to his discredit, he keeps giving interviews in which he sometimes puts his foot in his mouth again and says stupid things,
Mhm.
and it doesn't help any healing that may ever occur to his reputation in America. One of his interviews year recently he was talking about having Trump in this movie Celebrity, and oh, Trump was a very professional actor, and he was a pretty good guy, you know. Yeah, I don't know why he turned out this way. I did vote for Kamala, but when I worked with him, he was a pretty good guy. Or something of that sort, which
Yeah.
you're better off not answering the question if that's what you're going to say.
Right.
But he does like to give interviews. He doesn't like to be told to shut up or to stop making movies. And after seeing Coup de Chance, I'm open-minded. Maybe he's got another good movie in him.
Yeah. Do you know what the movie's about by any chance?
No, I read like a one-line summary, but the answer is it's going to be about, you know, something he wrote 12 years ago that he's going to put into Madrid. But,
Yeah.
I think we're going to find out pretty soon because it's not like he's a slow worker.
Right.
you know. So I think once he has money and they say, let's come on over here, and he loves Spain,
Mhm.
what's going to hold him up? Nothing,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, he could probably write a script, and he probably has three scripts. I say in my book that he always has three scripts in his desk, ready.
Mhm.
And sometimes he just changes the location or the lead from a male to a female.
Mhm.
And he can do it in a week, that script,
Yeah.
fix it all up. So I don't know which one it is. I'm on tenterhooks like you are.
Mm. I guess this is the same question I had about Altman, but did you get a reaction from Alan himself about your book?
No.
Mm.
But I don't. I got a reaction from, Clint Eastwood. I got a $10 million lawsuit. I got a
Mm.
reaction from Jack Nicholson in an interview where he said, well, I'm not going to read it. It makes me feel like I'm dead. I was, that was like, 25 or 30. But by the way, a very intelligent reaction, I think. A very
Mhm.
intelligent reaction. Um, so I don't even know if he's read it. And to be honest, I don't care. I mean, it'd be nice if he read it and he told everybody, he gave an interview and said, I love McGilligan's book. Would it help McGilligan's book? I don't know.
Mhm.
And if he said, I hate McGilligan's book, would that help McGilligan's book? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't written, I didn't try to meet him. I didn't try to interview him because he's given 10,000 interviews. I, it's, I'm fond of his films. I don't hold people's personalities or their private behavior against them unless it's like venal
Mm.
behavior or criminal or immoral. And in Woody's case, this has not been proved.
Yeah.
So even though a lot of people think he's immoral, people tell me all the time, he married his stepdaughter. Well, not exactly, no. But so there's this whole, mythology about him that makes him into a creep.
Mm.
Uh, and I've had many people say to me, I like him, but my mind is poisoned, against him and his films now. And,
Mm.
decent, intelligent people. I understand that.
Yeah.
That's what hysteria is. Uh, that's what a blacklist or witch hunt atmosphere is like. We're going through this in America writ large now, where people believe something that has been repeated, a thousand times. That's a complete idiotic falsehood, and then they believe it, and it becomes part of American history.
Yeah.
So, so I'm sympathetic to people being led astray. So, I wish that the book had, I would rather the book have pleased and helped Woody, but that wasn't in my mind at all.
What do you make of the fact that he, after his scandal first happened in the 90s, like he continued to portray himself in his own movies with younger and younger girlfriends? Was he kind of just being defiant, or was he tone deaf, or what was
Well,
that?
he's definitely tone deaf, and he's definitely defiant. But
Okay.
he's also, a writer who's writing his own life story into the characters and into the stories obsessively
Hmm.
throughout his entire career from stand up till now.
Hmm.
And he doesn't know any other way, or he knows another way occasionally, like with Match Point or something. He breaks out of that
Yeah.
and and he enjoys playing with it, with this problem that he has,
Yeah.
on screen. And I think, a movie like Deconstructing Harry, for example, which is about that to a certain extent, because he has various girlfriends and wives, and he's being trailed around by a African American, actually she's Caribbean American hooker,
Hmm.
um, which in all kinds of ways reflects things that have been said about him. And he's bad to everybody, but women especially. Um, the movie's hilarious.
Hmm.
I like it. A lot of people don't. I like it a lot. It's
Hmm.
scathingly hilarious about himself. It's a self-critique. It's an auto-critique. So he's quite capable of being an idiot, in an interview or in a movie about himself. And he's quite capable of turning around and being brilliantly, incisively, you know, satirical about himself. He can do both.
Hmm.
Actually, you can't probably stop him from doing both. It's just, that's the kind of a very weird person he is. He's not like Mel Brooks, where with Mel Brooks, I wrote a book about Mel Brooks. What you get from Mel Brooks every time is the familiar thing you expect and love and are looking forward to guffawing at,
Hmm.
and he's giving you that same meatloaf, over and over again to really laugh at. He plays with the meatloaf and it's different, but it's meatloaf,
Hmm.
it's Mel Brooks, here's your meatloaf.
Hmm.
Woody is always doing whatever is in his head, which is he's got an odd head, So sometimes it's a really great, suspense thriller. Sometimes it's a love story like Midnight in Paris, in which, none of these things that you're mentioning, young girls, et cetera, exist as a problem in that movie, really.
Hmm.
And the movie's great. And it's a very romantic, nostalgic, sentimental love story, comedy.
Hmm.
And so he's capable of breaking out of it, but the mold that most people see him in is this thing to which he returns to over and over again, in which he puts himself in movies in various ways as this, woebegone guy who is always after younger girls. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he knows that's part of himself, and he's sometimes affectionate about that, and other times he's very hypercritical.
Hmm. Okay. Well, last question before I let you go. Please
Yeah.
give us your top two or three favorite movies of all time.
Oh, that's very hard, and they'd probably be all foreign.
Okay.
I already mentioned, my favorite American movies of like the post '60s, and most of them, and my foreign movies would include like, a Truffaut and a Kurosawa and a Ozu. And I vote in the Sight and Sound poll once every 10 years when they
Mm.
let me, which they have let me recently for 20 years, 30 years. And my surprising bests or favorites are very conventional, and align with many, many other people. And that's even true of American films. Like if you said pre 1960s, or what was your favorite Hitchcock film? I'd be saying, "Oh, I love It's a Wonderful Life," and Rear Window is a great film.
Mm.
I wouldn't shock you. But if you said to me, "What do you think of Lifeboat?" Let's
Mm.
say a relatively unsung Hitchcock, I'd say, "Well, it's my secret favorite. I really love it."
Mm. That's great. I love Lifeboat too.
Yeah, it's a secret favorite. I really love it. And but I don't even, we haven't mentioned George Cukor. I don't even, admire Hitchcock above everyone else. I mean, I prefer a George Cukor film. Why?
Mm.
I like comedy. I like romantic comedy. I like a man and a woman who are like married and breaking up. And um, I like Hepburn and Tracy.
Mhm.
I like Hepburn and Cary Grant, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I like the Kanans. They were really adult comedy writers, very pioneering scenarists for their time. So, and in Hitchcock films, even the greatest ones, well, mostly the greatest ones avoid that problem, but a lot of Hitchcock films are true to a form, true to a form, and that form is not actually my first choice.
Mhm. Sure. Okay, well, Patrick McGilligan, I really appreciate you doing this today, and thanks a lot for your time.
You're welcome, Michael.